The sun was sinking over the dry plains of Wyoming in 1887 when a young native woman named Elena was left alone beside an abandoned trail. The wind moved softly through the tall yellow grass, carrying the distant sound of horses disappearing toward the mountains. Elena watched until the last rider vanished beyond the ridge. She had once been known as the daughter of a respected chief, but after a terrible accident left her unable to walk, everything had changed. Her people believed the coming winter would be too harsh for someone who could not travel with the tribe. Wrapped in an old wool blanket, Elena sat beside a dying fire, staring at the empty trail. Her legs felt heavy and useless beneath her. She was frightened, but she refused to cry. Deep inside, she still hoped someone might come. The evening grew colder. Elena reached for the small water flask lying several feet away, but her hands slipped against the dirt. She tried again, pulling herself forward with trembling arms. The effort exhausted her. She rested her head against the ground and listened to the wind. She could hear coyotes somewhere far away. There was no shelter nearby, no food except a few dried pieces of meat, and barely enough water to survive the night. Elena closed her eyes and remembered her father. He had once told her that courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was continuing to breathe when fear told you to give up. She held those words in her heart as darkness slowly covered the prairie. Then she heard something unexpected. A horse. At first, Elena thought she was imagining it, but the sound became clearer with every passing second. Hooves struck the hard ground somewhere beyond the ridge. Elena lifted her head and stared into the darkness. A lone rider appeared against the fading orange sky. He was tall, dressed in a worn brown coat, dusty boots, and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat. A rifle rested across the saddle, but his hands remained relaxed. His name was Ethan Cole, a quiet rancher who rarely spoke more than necessary. He had been riding home after checking a distant waterline when he noticed the weak glow of Elena's fire. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop. He studied the camp from a distance before slowly approaching. Elena immediately became nervous. She had heard enough stories about strangers on the frontier to know that not every traveler meant safety. She reached for a small knife beside the blanket, though her trembling fingers barely touched its handle. Ethan noticed the movement, but did not reach for his weapon. Instead, he climbed down from his horse and stood several steps away. "Easy," he said quietly. Elena watched him carefully. Ethan pointed toward the fallen water flask. Without saying another word, he walked over, picked it up, checked the remaining water, and brought it to her. Elena hesitated before accepting it. Her hands shook as she drank. The water was warm and tasted of leather, but to her it felt like the finest drink in the world. Ethan looked around the abandoned camp. There were no horses, no wagons, and no other people. His expression changed when he understood what had happened. Someone had deliberately left this woman alone. He crouched beside her but kept his distance. "Where are your people?" he asked. Elena looked toward the trail. "Gone." That single word told Ethan enough. He could have ridden away. The nearest town was many miles distant, and helping a stranger could bring trouble, but Ethan had spent most of his life on the frontier, where survival often depended on whether someone was willing to help when help was desperately needed. He removed his heavy coat and placed it around Elena's shoulders. She tried to protest, but Ethan shook his head. "You'll freeze before morning." Elena looked at him with suspicion mixed with confusion. She could not understand why a stranger would risk himself for someone others had abandoned. Ethan returned to his horse and prepared the saddle. Then he came back and carefully lifted Elena from the ground. She stiffened at first, afraid she might fall, but Ethan held her securely. He carried her toward his horse and settled her gently against the saddle. The movement caused pain in her legs, and she clenched her teeth to stop herself from crying out, Ethan noticed. "Almost there," he said. They began riding beneath a sky filled with stars. Elena looked back one last time at the small camp where she had expected to die. The fire was almost completely gone now. The trail behind them disappeared into darkness. For the first time since her accident, Elena felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Ethan did not promise that everything would be easy. He did not know if she would ever walk again. He did not even know her full story. But he knew one thing: he would not leave her there. As his horse carried them toward the distant lights of his ranch, Elena rested against his coat and quietly closed her eyes. Neither of them knew that before the winter ended, the decision Ethan made that night would change both their lives forever. Ethan carried Elena to his isolated ranch just before midnight. The small wooden house stood alone beneath the Wyoming sky, surrounded by open grassland and distant mountains. He brought her inside and placed her near the warm kitchen stove, then prepared a simple bed for her in a quiet room beside the kitchen. Elena expected questions, suspicion, or perhaps regret, but Ethan asked for nothing. The next morning, he brought her water, cooked a warm meal, and made sure she was comfortable. He treated her with the same quiet respect he would have shown anyone in need. For Elena, that kindness was almost harder to understand than cruelty. She had spent weeks believing that her life no longer mattered. Now, a stranger was behaving as if it mattered more than anything. The days slowly turned into weeks. Ethan continued working his ranch. While caring for Elena whenever he returned from the fields, he never treated her as helpless. Instead, he encouraged her to do whatever she could by herself. Elena began strengthening her arms by pulling herself across the wooden floor and using the table for support. Some mornings were difficult. There were times when pain and frustration brought tears to her eyes, but Ethan never told her to give up. One afternoon he returned from his workshop carrying something he had built himself. It was a simple wooden chair with large wheels, strong enough to move across the ranch. Ethan placed Elena into it and pushed her toward the front door. When she realized she could move herself by pushing the wheels, a small smile appeared on her face. It was the first real smile Ethan had seen since the night he found her. For the first time since her accident, Elena began feeling independent again. She could reach the garden, watch the horses, and sit beneath the cottonwood tree near the creek. Ethan often worked nearby, repairing fences, while she practiced moving across the uneven ground. Their friendship grew quietly, without promises or unnecessary words. Ethan remained the same silent cowboy, but Elena learned to understand the meaning behind his actions. When he left an extra blanket near her chair, he was saying he cared. When he repaired the wheels without being asked, he was saying he wanted her to remain free. When he placed a cup of coffee beside her each morning, he was reminding her that she belonged there. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Elena was sitting outside when she noticed movement on the distant ridge. Several riders were approaching the ranch. She immediately recognized the markings on their horses. Her heart began beating faster. "They found me," she whispered. Ethan looked toward the ridge and slowly stood. The riders entered the ranch without fear. Their leader was an older warrior named Tomas, a trusted man from Elena's father's camp. He stopped his horse several yards from the house and demanded that Ethan return the chief's daughter. Ethan remained silent. Tomas warned him that Elena belonged with her people. Ethan did not raise his rifle. Instead, he stepped between the riders and Elena. The tension lasted several long seconds. Then Elena pushed her wooden chair forward. She told Tomas everything. She explained how she had been left beside the trail, how Ethan had found her, and how he had carried her to safety when everyone else had believed she would die. She told them Ethan never demanded anything from her. He had simply helped her live. Tomas looked at her carefully. Then another rider arrived. It was Elena's father, Chief Aaron. The proud old chief dismounted slowly. When he saw his daughter sitting in the wooden chair, alive and stronger than before, his expression changed. He had expected to find a helpless woman waiting to return home. Instead, he saw his daughter looking directly at him with courage. Chief Aaron lowered his head. He finally understood that abandoning Elena had almost cost him his daughter forever. He approached Ethan and offered his hand. Ethan accepted it. No grand speech was needed. Chief Aaron then turned toward Elena and told her she was free to choose where she belonged. Elena looked at the ranch, the mountains, and finally at Ethan. She chose to stay, not because she was helpless, not because she needed saving, but because Ethan had given her something no one else had given her, a chance to decide her own future. As the riders disappeared toward the mountains, Ethan stood beside Elena beneath the evening sky. The silent cowboy had never expected to become anyone's hero. He had simply refused to leave a dying woman behind, and sometimes one act of kindness is enough to change two lives forever.